In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
In the 41st millennium, there is only war. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat immobile upon the golden throne of Terra, a corpse sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychic souls each day, his will alone holding shut the gateway to humanity's damnation. But what happens when that ancient prison shatters, and the God Emperor falls not into death, but into a universe that never knew his name? The Golden Throne's failure was not gradual. It was catastrophic. Across the Imperium, 1 billion astropaths screamed as one. The Astronomicon, that psychic lighthouse guiding humanity through the warp, flickered and died. In the webway beneath the Imperial Palace, the demon hordes surged forward, sensing their moment. But they found no breach. The Emperor was simply gone, not dead. The warp would have convulsed with his passing, birthing a new god in the Immaterium. No, something far stranger had occurred. A rent in reality itself, caused by forces beyond even his vast understanding, had torn the master of mankind from his throne and cast him across the dimensional barrier separating one cosmos from another. He fell through the screaming void between realities, his immortal form aflame with psychic fire. 10,000 years of accumulated agony burning away like shed skin. For the first time since Horus struck him down, the Emperor of mankind drew breath without the Golden Throne's life support. His perpetual nature, suppressed for millennia by his catastrophic wounds, surged back to full potency. The fall lasted an eternity and an instant. When it ended, he struck Earth. Not Terra, but Earth. The impact crater carved itself into the Sonoran Desert at 3:47 a.m. local time, 50 miles from any human settlement. Seismic sensors registered a 4.2 magnitude event. Satellites captured a thermal bloom that defied conventional analysis. SHIELD's threat assessment algorithms flagged the anomaly within seconds, dispatching aerial reconnaissance. They would find nothing. By the time the first drone arrived at dawn, the crater was empty save for cooling glass and residual radiation that made Geiger counters sing hymns of confusion. The Emperor stood 3 miles away, naked save for the golden radiance that clung to his skin like a second flesh. His form was as he remembered it, before the throne, before Horus, before the weight of divinity crushed him into immobility. 12 feet of sculpted perfection, features that shifted subtly depending on who might observe him, radiating a presence that made reality itself bend in supplication. But something was wrong. His psychic senses, honed across 48 millennia, swept outward and found confusion. The warp was absent, not dead. He could sense psychic energy, psionic potential, threads of power woven through this reality. But it operated by different principles entirely. The Immaterium's familiar corruption, that eternal background radiation of humanity's worst impulses crystallized into demonic form, was simply not present. In its place, something stranger. Cosmic energies that followed rules he did not recognize. Magical currents flowing from dimensions his precognition could not penetrate. Entities of such power they registered as stars in his psychic perception. Yet they were not warp-born. For the first time in thousands of years, the Emperor of mankind felt uncertainty. He reached out with his mind, seeking information, and found it in abundance. This world called itself Earth, but it was not his Earth. The year was 2025 by their calendar, yet this planet's history diverged from humanity's true path millennia ago. They had no God Emperor, no Imperium, no understanding of the horrors lurking in the dark between stars. Yet they thrived. 7 billion souls, primitive by the standards of the 41st millennium, but vital, chaotic, free in ways his Imperium had forgotten. And they were not alone. His psychic sweep detected other beings, post-human entities of tremendous power walking openly among baseline humanity. Mutants, aliens, sorcerers. Beings who wielded cosmic forces as casually as his custodians wielded guardian spears. Some registered as threats on par with Primarchs. Others eclipsed even that august comparison. The Emperor's jaw tightened. He had spent 10,000 years as a living corpse, unable to act while his Imperium rotted around him, watching his grand vision curdle into the very theocracy he had fought to prevent. Now, impossibly, he stood free in a universe that defied everything he understood about humanity's place in the cosmos. And somewhere, 50 light years from this world, his sensors detected a cosmic signature that made even his ancient hearts skip a beat. The psychic emanation of a being, no, multiple beings, that dwarfed anything he had encountered since the war in heaven's ancient echoes. He needed information, resources. Time to understand this strange new cosmos before its powers detected him. The Emperor had not survived the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, and the Horus Heresy by acting rashly. Observation first, understanding second, action only when victory was certain. But even as he began walking toward the distant lights of human civilization, the Emperor's precognition flickered. A warning. In a tower in New York City, a man in a strange collar of levitation opened his eyes, disturbed by a disturbance in the mystic currents. In a castle in Latveria, sensors attuned to dimensional breaches began their alarm. And in the cosmic spaces beyond Earth's atmosphere, ancient eyes older than this galaxy turned their attention toward a new variable in their grand equation. The Emperor had arrived in the Marvel Universe. And nothing would ever be the same. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions and impossible tyrants torn from their thrones, smash that subscribe button. Witness what happens when the God Emperor of 40K confronts a universe that never learned to kneel. He pulled knowledge from the minds of sleeping humans in a nearby town, sifting through their memories like a scholar browsing archives. Language, culture, history, technology, all of it flowed into his consciousness. Within minutes, he understood this world's geopolitical landscape, its heroes and villains, its triumphs and its foolish naivety. They had no idea what real war looked like, what real sacrifice demanded. Perhaps that was a blessing, or perhaps it was a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The Emperor's eyes blazed gold in the desert darkness as he began walking east, toward New York City, toward answers, toward whatever destiny this strange universe held. Behind him, the crater cooled, and in the Warhammer 40,000 universe he had left behind, the Imperium of man began its final collapse. Leaderless for the first time in 10 millennia, the Emperor materialized clothed through an act of will. Not true matter creation, but psychic persuasion so profound that reality bent to his expectation. A simple black coat, dark trousers, boots, unremarkable. He dampened his presence to a whisper, shrouding himself in psychic camouflage that would make him forgettable to mortal perception. Not invisible, that would itself draw attention from those sensitive to magic, but mundane. Another traveler in the night. He walked. The desert gave way to scrubland, then highway. A truck driver would later report picking up a hitchhiker outside Phoenix, though he could never quite remember the man's face. Only that his eyes seemed old. Very, very old. By the time the sun rose over New York City, the Emperor stood in Times Square, drowning in humanity. 7 million souls in one city. The psychic noise was extraordinary. A cacophony of hopes, fears, petty concerns, and boundless dreams that would have driven lesser psychers to madness. But the Emperor had weathered the screams of dying astropaths and the whispers of chaos gods. This was merely different. Where his Imperium's psychic landscape had been shaped by millennia of warfare, religious fervor, and existential dread, this world's collective unconscious pulsed with something he had not felt in ages. Hope. It disgusted him. Not because he despised hope. He had been humanity's greatest hope once, but because it was unearned. These people lived in blissful ignorance of the predators circling their world. The Emperor's psychic senses detected threats this civilization seemed to accept as normal. Alien infiltrators walking their streets. Dimensional incursions bleeding through weak points in reality. Cosmic entities observing Earth like farmers watching livestock. Yet they built skyscrapers, sold coffee, argued about politics, loved, laughed, lived as though tomorrow was guaranteed. Fools. Beautiful, tragic fools. You're blocking the sidewalk, buddy. The Emperor turned. A young woman, early 20s, gestured irritably around him. The morning commuter rush flowed like a river, and he was a stone disrupting the current. He stepped aside without comment, watching her disappear into the crowd. In the Imperium, she would have been conscripted into factory work or pressed into guard service. Here, she worried about being late to her office job. The contrast was so absurd, he almost smiled. Almost. His reverie shattered as a tremor ran through his psychic senses. A disturbance in the magical currents underlying this reality. Someone was coming. Someone powerful. The Emperor's hand instinctively moved to where Apollonian's spear should have hung. But of course, his weapons had not made the journey across realities. No matter. He had ended Xenos empires with his bare hands before the spear was ever forged. The air in front of him tore open. Not a warp rift, the methodology was entirely different. But the effect was similar. A circular portal of golden sparks, intricate geometric patterns rotating within. And through it stepped a man in blue robes trimmed with red. A strange cloak floating behind him, without wind. Dr. Stephen Strange, Sorcerer, Supreme of Earth Dimension 616. Studied the Emperor with eyes that had stared into the dark dimension and survived. His hands moved in complex gestures, weaving diagnostic spells that washed over the Emperor like harmless rain. The civilians around them continued walking, unseeing. A perception filter, crude but effective. "You don't belong here," Strange said. His voice carried absolute certainty. "You're not from this universe, not even from this type of universe. The metaphysical signature you're radiating is wrong, like looking at a color that shouldn't exist." The Emperor regarded him with the patience of stones. "You are a psyker, powerful by the standards of this world. Yet you bind yourself with rules and mystical traditions. Inefficient." Strange's eyes narrowed. "You can see my spells, understand them. That shouldn't be possible for someone from outside our reality. What are you?" "I am the Emperor of mankind." He said it simply, without boast or pride. A statement of fact. "And you have approximately 4 seconds to lower your hands before I end you." To Strange's credit, he did not immediately comply, but neither did he attack. Instead, he cast a spell the Emperor recognized as Divination, an attempt to glimpse his past, his nature, his purpose. The spell touched the Emperor's psyche and recoiled as though burned. Strange gasped, staggering backward. His face had gone pale. You, I saw, the Golden Throne, the Imperium, 10,000 years of agony, a million worlds burning in your name, gods and demons, and... He steadied himself against a lamppost that no one else could see them near. What manner of tyrant are you? The necessary kind. The Emperor took a step forward. Strange's hands blazed with eldritch energy, defensive wards snapping into place around him. To his credit, they were impressively constructed. Multi-layered shields drawing power from extra-dimensional sources, reinforced with enchantments that would have made the Emperor's own sigillites nod in approval. They would not stop him. But the Emperor had not come here to fight. Peace, sorcerer. I did not cross the dimensional barrier to make enemies. I am displaced, seeking understanding of this cosmos. Strange did not lower his guard, but the killing spells faded from his fingertips. Understanding. You're a psychic entity powerful enough to register as a cosmic threat, wearing the face of a man who ruled over trillions, who commanded armies of post-human warriors, who orchestrated genocides in the name of humanity's survival. And you want understanding? I want, the Emperor said quietly, to know why this version of humanity has not destroyed itself. In my universe, I guided our species for 38,000 years, and the moment I could no longer lead, it began to crumble. Yet here, you thrive without a guiding hand, without unity, without purpose beyond individual whim. It defies every law of historical inevitability I have observed. For a long moment, Strange simply stared. Then, impossibly, he laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're serious? You actually believe humanity needs a tyrant to survive? I believe humanity needs guidance, structure, protection from forces beyond their comprehension. I have witnessed what happens when baseline humans confront the horrors between stars without preparation. I have scraped their remains from spaceship hulls and burned corrupted colonies to ash. Do not lecture me on human potential, sorcerer. I have watched it bloom and wither across 48 millennia. Strange's expression softened just slightly. I've seen your universe now. The fragments you carry. You're not lying. That's what terrifies me. You genuinely believe everything you did was necessary. Because it was. No. Strange's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. It was one path among infinite possibilities, and it led to hell. I've fought gods, Emperor. I've bargained with cosmic abstracts and walked through dying universes. I know what happens when beings like you decide they know what's best for everyone else. The Emperor's eyes blazed with golden light, his psychic presence flaring like a sun. Civilians 20 feet away suddenly felt an inexplicable urge to be elsewhere. And what happens, sorcerer? Enlighten the being who has forgotten more about warfare than your species has ever learned. You become the very monster you sought to prevent. Strange's hands lowered, though his shields remained. Your Imperium. It's everything you originally fought against. Theocracy, superstition, tyranny. You built paradise, and it curdled into the cruelest regime imaginable. That's not humanity's failing. It's yours. Silence stretched between them. In the distance, a siren wailed. A street vendor called out in Spanish. Life continued. Unaware that two beings capable of shattering cities were engaged in philosophical warfare. You know nothing of what I have sacrificed, the Emperor said finally. His voice had gone cold, empty. But you are correct about one thing. I have built monuments to order and watched them crumble to ash. Perhaps that is the lesson I was meant to learn. Strange studied him, and the Emperor felt the sorcerer's consciousness brush against his own. Not an attack, but a question. What do you want here? The Emperor responded in kind, psychic to psychic, bypassing the limitations of language. To understand, to observe, to determine if this world's approach to survival has merit, or if it is merely enjoying a temporary reprieve before reality devours it. And if you decide it needs your brand of salvation, then your heroes will attempt to stop me. And we shall see if freedom or order proves the stronger philosophy. Strange withdrew from the mental contact, his expression grave. I should warn them about you. The Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D., every hero on this planet. You could, but you will not. Why wouldn't I? The Emperor gestured at the city around them, at the millions of souls going about their lives. Because you glimpsed what I fled. You saw the Imperium falling, the Astronomicon dying, demons pouring through the webway. You understand that my presence here means my universe is likely doomed. And you, like me, cannot help but wonder. Could this Earth's methods have saved my humanity? Or would my way have saved yours? Strange's jaw clenched. The Emperor had struck true. I will watch you, Strange said finally. Every moment. If you threaten this world, then bring your champions. I have faced down Primarchs and Chaos Gods. I will not be cowed by beings who call themselves heroes. The portal reopened behind Strange, its golden light a stark contrast to the morning sun. For what it's worth, Emperor, I'm sorry for what you endured, for what you became. But this world doesn't need saving your way. We've got enough tyrants already. Then I shall endeavor not to add to your collection. Yet. Strange stepped through the portal and was gone, leaving the Emperor alone in Times Square once more. The perception filter lifted. Reality resumed its normal flow. The Emperor stood motionless for 3 full minutes, processing the encounter. Then he began walking again, heading toward the public library. If he was to understand this universe, he would need more than psychic reconnaissance. He would need to learn why these people believed freedom was worth the risk of extinction. Behind him, in his sanctum sanctorum, Dr. Strange immediately began scrying, searching for information about the impossible being who had just threatened everything he protected. What he found in the mystic records would keep him awake for the next 48 hours. And in Latveria, Dr. Doom's sensors finally isolated the dimensional breach's origin point. A smile crossed the monarch's iron mask. A rival emperor had arrived. How interesting. The New York Public Library's main branch stood as a temple to knowledge. Its Beaux-Arts architecture a pale echo of the grand libraries the Emperor had commissioned during the Great Crusade. He ascended the steps between the stone lions, finding bitter amusement in humanity's consistent need to flank their repositories of learning with symbols of predatory strength. Inside, he moved through the stacks like a ghost, absorbing information at a rate that would have seemed superhuman to observers. Because it was. His fingers brushed book spines, and their contents flooded into his consciousness. History, philosophy, science, fiction that revealed more about this world's psychology than any factual account. This Earth's humanity had faced extinction events and emerged not through unity, but through the intervention of exceptional individuals. The Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. Time and again, small groups of post-human defenders had stood between civilization and annihilation. It was inefficient, chaotic, dependent on variables that should never be trusted. Individual conscience, personal heroism, the whims of beings powerful enough to ignore consequences. Yet it had worked. For decades, this approach had worked. The Emperor settled into a reading room, surrounding himself with texts on metahuman sociology, extraterrestrial contact protocols, and the documented history of cosmic threats. A librarian passed by, saw him reading, and experienced a moment of profound certainty that this man belonged here and should not be disturbed. She moved on without realizing she'd been psychically nudged. Hours passed. The Emperor consumed knowledge, cross-referencing, analyzing, building a framework for understanding this universe's metaphysical architecture. The Infinity Stones, singular points of cosmic authority that predated this reality. The Celestials, ancient beings who seeded worlds with life and judged their creations. The dimensional barriers between worlds, far more porous than the warp, yet somehow more stable. Magic that drew from extra-dimensional entities rather than the collective unconscious. It was elegant, and it was terrifying. Because the more he learned, the more he recognized the signs. This universe was not paradise. It teetered on the same razor's edge as his own reality, balanced precariously between order and chaos, with only the actions of exceptional individuals preventing collapse. The difference was that here, those individuals chose their burden. They were not created, not engineered, not commanded. They volunteered. The concept was so alien to his experience that he spent 20 minutes simply contemplating it. In the Imperium, service was mandatory. The Primarchs were designed. The Space Marines were indoctrinated. Even his custodians, the pinnacle of human achievement, were shaped from infancy to serve. Free will existed in theory, but in practice, every citizen served the Imperium or died. Here, beings of godlike power could have ruled, yet chose instead to protect. It was inefficient, irrational, beautiful in its foolishness, and it enraged him. Because if this approach worked, if humanity could survive without his guidance, without his 10,000 years of agony, without the Imperium's brutal machinery of oppression, then what had it all been for? The Emperor's hands clenched, and the table beneath them cracked. He forced himself to calm, repairing the damage with a thought before anyone noticed. Control. He had not maintained his consciousness through millennia of torture by surrendering to emotion. His psychic senses suddenly flared. Another presence, vast and cold, was observing the library. Observing him. The attention felt like standing beneath a surgical light, analytical, impersonal, measuring him against some unknown metric. The Emperor rose smoothly, expanding his psychic awareness outward. The presence was not in the building, not on the ground. He looked up through stone and steel and sky and saw them, 5,000 miles above Earth's surface, hanging in the silent void, stood a Celestial. The being was impossible to miss once detected. 2,000 feet of living cosmic metal, its armor etched with glyphs that predated Earth's sun. Arishem the Judge, though the Emperor did not yet know its name. It regarded the planet with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. And now, one of those eyes had turned its full attention on the entity radiating impossible psychic power from Manhattan's library. The Emperor met its gaze across the gulf of space and atmosphere. Two ancient beings, each representing a different philosophy of creation, acknowledged one another. The Celestial did not speak. It simply observed, its consciousness touching the Emperor's like a scientist examining a bacterium under glass. The Emperor felt himself being categorized, assessed, judged according to criteria he did not understand. He pushed back. His psychic might surged outward, not as an attack, but as a statement. I am not your subject. I bow to no Xenos authority. Regardless of its age or power, the Celestial's attention intensified. For 3 seconds, the two beings engaged in a contest of will that would have vaporized lesser minds. The Emperor felt the Celestial's purpose. It was a gardener, cultivating species across millennia, pruning those that failed to meet its standards. Billions of lives were nothing to it. Entire civilizations were experiments to be discarded if found wanting. It was everything the Emperor despised about Xenos arrogance, magnified to cosmic scale. The contest ended not with victory, but with mutual withdrawal. The Celestial turned its attention back to its eternal vigil, having filed the Emperor away as an anomaly to be monitored. The Emperor released his psychic pressure, satisfied that he had made his position clear. But the encounter troubled him. The Celestials represented a threat unlike anything in his home universe. They were not corrupted by chaos. They could not be reasoned with through diplomacy. They were not conquerors who could be defeated militarily. They simply were ancient, powerful, and utterly indifferent to individual suffering in service of their incomprehensible design. The Emperor had built the Imperium to protect humanity from external threats. But how did one defend against beings who saw humanity as an experiment, as crops to be harvested when ripe? He needed more information. More importantly, he needed allies, whether they knew they were his allies or not. The Emperor left the library as afternoon shadows lengthened across Manhattan. His psychic sweep of the city revealed numerous individuals of interest. A building in Midtown that radiated technological sophistication far beyond this era's norm. A school in Westchester where dozens of mutant signatures clustered. A tower near the harbor where something vast and green occasionally made the ground tremble. But his attention was drawn to a different signal. In a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a mind of extraordinary brilliance was actively scanning for his presence. Not mystically, like Strange, but technologically. Sophisticated sensors were combing the electromagnetic spectrum, searching for the energy signature his arrival had generated. The Emperor smiled, a rare expression that did not reach his eyes. Someone was hunting him. How refreshing. He walked toward the source, making no effort to hide his approach. If this civilization's defenders wanted to find him, he would not deny them the opportunity. Better to take their measure now, before his presence triggered conflicts he could not control. The building was called Stark Tower, a monument to ego that soared above its neighbors like a raised middle finger to humility. The Emperor approached the entrance and was immediately surrounded by hidden weapon systems, repulsor cannons, sonic disruptors, electromagnetic pulse generators, all aimed at his position. Impressive. For a civilization that had not yet achieved reliable fusion power, their weapons development showed remarkable ingenuity. That's close enough. The voice came from speakers concealed in the building's facade. Male, confident, with an undertone of controlled fear. I don't know what you are, but I've got 17 different weapon systems locked on your position, and that's just the ones I want you to know about. Tony Stark, the Emperor said calmly. Futurist, genius, builder of armor to make yourself the equal of beings beyond your natural capability. I have read your file. It is adequate. A pause. Adequate. Right. The guy who shows up reading like a nuclear reactor had a baby with a psychic alien is calling my life's work adequate. That's just great for my ego. Your ego will survive the wound. I wish to speak with you. Yeah. See, here's the thing about mysterious cosmic entities showing up at my door. It usually means someone's about to try enslaving humanity or eating the sun or some other Tuesday afternoon apocalypse scenario. So before I let you in, how about you tell me what you are, where you came from, and why Dr. Strange just sent me a priority alert with the words God Emperor and existential threat in the same sentence. The Emperor considered his response. Honesty, he decided. Partial honesty, at least. I am a perpetual human from an alternate universe, where humanity conquered the stars and paid for that conquest with its soul. I was that empire's creator and prisoner, sustained for 10,000 years by sacrifice and suffering, until a dimensional breach tore me free and deposited me here. I mean your world no harm, provided it proves capable of defending itself without my intervention. Another pause, longer this time. The Emperor could sense Stark running the statement through multiple analysis algorithms, cross-referencing with SHIELD databases, probably consulting with an artificial intelligence of impressive sophistication. Okay, Stark said finally. That's either the most honest answer I've ever heard from a cosmic threat, or you're playing four-dimensional chess and I'm still on checkers. Either way, you've got my attention. Top floor, elevators unlocked. But Stark, if you're lying, I've got a Hulk on speed dial, and he's been cranky lately. The Emperor entered the building, noting the dozens of additional defensive systems tracking his movement. Stark was paranoid. Good. Paranoia had kept humanity alive in the 41st millennium. It might serve the same purpose here. The elevator ascended in silence. The Emperor prepared himself for the next confrontation, knowing that each interaction shaped his understanding of this strange new cosmos and determined whether he would save it or rule it. The doors opened to a penthouse that reeked of genius and excess. And standing in armor of red and gold, repulsors already glowing with charge, was the man who would force the Emperor to question everything he thought he knew about humanity's potential. Tony Stark's armor was a masterwork of engineering. Perhaps the finest example of individual craftsmanship the Emperor had seen since the Mechanicum's golden age, before superstition strangled innovation. Miniaturized arc reactor, repulsor technology that bent conventional physics, computational systems integrated seamlessly with human neural patterns. For a civilization that still relied on combustion engines and chemical rockets, it was a staggering achievement. It would last approximately 8 seconds against a Chaos Space Marine. So, Stark said, his faceplate retracting to reveal sharp eyes studying the Emperor with unconcealed wariness. You're the interdimensional tyrant who's got Strange's mystical panties in a twist. Gotta say, I expected more. I don't know, tentacles? Glowing eyes? Maybe some ominous floating? You just look like a really tall guy in need of a good tailor. The Emperor glanced down at his psychically manifested clothing. Would tentacles make you more comfortable? Please don't. I've had enough nightmare fuel this year. Stark gestured to a leather couch. Have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Whiskey? The existential dread of confronting your own obsolescence? I do not require sustenance. The Emperor remained standing, his gaze sweeping across the penthouse. Every surface told a story, scattered holographic projections of armor designs, a wall of arc reactor prototypes, framed photographs of Stark, with various individuals the Emperor recognized from his research as Earth's defenders. You surround yourself with reminders of your achievements, insecurity masked as pride. Stark's jaw tightened. And you're what? The universe's worst therapist? I invite cosmic horrors into my home, and they critique my decor. Fantastic. I critique your psychology. You have built yourself into a weapon because you fear your own inadequacy. Without the armor, you are merely human. Brilliant, but mortal. Vulnerable. The armor is not protection, it is compensation. Okay, first of all, rude. Stark's repulsors flared slightly. Second, you don't know me well enough to. I have led humanity for 38,000 years before my imprisonment. I have studied the patterns of human ambition and fear across 10,000 generations. You are not unique, Anthony Stark. You are simply more talented than most at hiding your wounds behind wit and technology. For a moment, genuine anger flashed across Stark's face. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, sharp and bitter. You know what? Fair. Yeah, I built myself into a weapon because I was afraid. Because I looked at gods and monsters and realized I was squishy flesh in a universe of nightmares. So I made myself harder to kill. Sue me. I do not condemn you for it. I commend you. Recognizing one's vulnerability and adapting is the mark of intelligence. Most humans simply deny their weakness until something devours them. Stark studied him for a long moment, then commanded his armor to retract. The nanotech flowed away, revealing a man in jeans and a Black Sabbath t-shirt. It was a gesture of trust, or calculated risk. All right, Emperor. Cards on the table? What do you actually want? Strange says you're from a universe that makes Mordor look like Disneyland. You claimed you're just observing, but I don't buy it. People with power don't just observe. They interfere. An accurate assessment. The Emperor moved to the window, looking out over Manhattan's sprawling complexity. I am observing because I am trying to understand a paradox. In my universe, humanity required absolute unity to survive. One vision, one purpose, one will. Without it, we fragmented into old night, 10,000 years of isolation, mutation, and horror. I reunified Terra through conquest, then launched the Great Crusade to reclaim the stars. It was brutal, necessary, the only path. And it went great, I'm guessing. It failed catastrophically. My sons betrayed me. My Imperium became the very theocracy I fought to prevent. 10,000 years of stagnation, superstition, and suffering. All because I could no longer guide them. The Emperor's reflection in the glass showed no emotion. But his voice carried the weight of millennia. Yet here, humanity survives without unity. Without a guiding will? You have gods walking among you, yet you do not worship them. You have threats that should have extinguished you, yet you endure through the actions of individuals pursuing their own moral compass. It defies everything I know to be true. Stark poured himself a drink, not offering one to the Emperor this time. So you're what? Having an existential crisis? Wondering if all your fascist empire building was for nothing? I am determining whether this universe's approach is genuinely superior, or whether you are simply fortunate. Whether your heroes are a sustainable defense, or a statistical anomaly waiting to collapse when probabilities finally turn against you. And if you decide we're just lucky, what then? The Emperor turned from the window, his golden eyes meeting Stark's. Then I will do what I have always done. I will ensure humanity's survival, whether humanity desires my intervention or not. There it is. Stark set his glass down hard enough to crack. The tyrant's creed. I know better than you what you need. You know how many times I've heard that? From gods, from aliens, from other humans who thought they had all the answers. It never ends well, Emperor. Never. Because they were wrong, I am not. Oh, Stark ran a hand through his hair. Okay, let me explain something to you. I've met actual gods. Thor, literal Norse god of thunder, is one of my best friends. I've fought alongside a guy who turns into a giant green rage monster. I've been to space, fought robots from the future, and died. Actually died. And you know what I learned? The moment someone says they're infallible, they're about to make the worst mistake of their life. Thor is not a god. He is a sufficiently advanced alien whose technology appears divine to primitive minds. Your Hulk is a radiation-induced mutation. These are explicable phenomena, not divine mandate. And you? What are you, Emperor? Because from where I'm standing, you look a lot like a guy who played God for so long he forgot he was playing. The Emperor's psychic presence flared, just for an instant, enough to make Stark take an involuntary step backward, enough to trigger every alarm in the building. I am a perpetual. I have died and returned over 1,000 times across human history. I guided humanity from its infancy, ensured its survival through ice ages and wars and catastrophes that would have ended lesser species. I am not playing at divinity, Stark. I am the closest thing to an eternal guardian humanity has ever possessed. Right up until you weren't. Stark's voice was quiet now, but steady. You said it yourself. Your Imperium failed. Your sons betrayed you. Your grand vision turned to ash. Maybe it's because you tried to be what humanity needed instead of letting humanity figure out what it wanted to be. And what does humanity want to be? Pray tell. Enlighten the being who has watched your species since before you could speak. Free. Stark met his gaze without flinching. We want to be free, to make our own choices, our own mistakes. Yeah, it's messy. Yeah, sometimes we need heroes to save us from ourselves. But those heroes don't rule us. They protect our right to be stupid, brilliant, petty, and magnificent all at once. That's the difference between your universe and ours. You tried to perfect humanity. We're trying to let humanity be human. Silence filled the penthouse. Outside, the city hummed with 7 million lives, pursuing 7 million different dreams. In the distance, a siren wailed. Police responding to some minor crisis that would never make the news, never require superhuman intervention, just ordinary humans solving ordinary problems. The Emperor watched it all, his expression unreadable. You have given me much to consider, he said finally. Your philosophy is coherent, even if I disagree with its conclusions. But philosophy means nothing without results. I will continue my observation. I will study your heroes, your threats, your methods of survival. And when I have gathered sufficient data, I will render my judgment. Judgment. Stark's jaw clenched. You keep using that word like you have the right to judge an entire planet. I have the capability, which is the only right that matters in an uncaring universe. But I will not act precipitously. Consider it a courtesy. I am giving your civilization the opportunity to prove itself before I decide whether it requires my intervention. How generous. Stark's sarcasm could have cut steel. And what happens if we don't pass your test? The Emperor moved toward the elevator, his conversation apparently concluded. Then I will do what I should have done 40,000 years ago. I will guide humanity properly this time. Without sentiment, without the weakness of paternal affection that led me to create sons who could betray me. I will build an empire that cannot fail, because it will not depend on individuals. It will be perfect, eternal, absolute. You mean you'll enslave us? The Emperor paused at the elevator doors. I will save you. Whether you understand that you need saving is irrelevant. The doors closed before Stark could respond. The Emperor descended, leaving the futurist standing alone in his penthouse, already pulling up communication protocols to warn every hero he knew that something far worse than Thanos had just declared its intentions. As the Emperor exited Stark Tower, his psychic senses detected new observers. The sorcerer was scrying again, likely reporting to his allies. Somewhere in space, the Celestials' attention had returned. And in Westchester, at a school for gifted youngsters, a telepath of extraordinary power had just noticed a psychic presence that rivaled her own. The pieces were moving. The board was set. The Emperor of Mankind would learn whether this universe's method of survival had merit, or whether freedom was just another word for chaos waiting to consume everything. He had time. He was patient. He had waited 10,000 years on a golden throne after all. He could wait a bit longer to condemn or save this world, but not much longer, but not much. Latveria had not invited the Emperor. But borders meant nothing to a being who could fold space with a thought. And Dr. Victor Von Doom did not wait for threats to come to him. He collected them. The invitation arrived as the Emperor walked through Brooklyn, taking in the diversity of human expression this world allowed. A holographic projection materialized before him, resolving into the iron-masked face of Latveria's monarch. Emperor of Mankind. Doom's voice resonated with aristocratic authority. You have been in my world for 36 hours, yet you have not called upon its greatest mind. An oversight I shall charitably attribute to unfamiliarity with this reality's hierarchy. I extend to you the courtesy of an audience in Castle Doom. Decline, and I shall assume you fear meeting a ruler who succeeded where you failed. The projection vanished before the Emperor could respond. Manipulation, crude but effective. Doom understood that beings of immense power often acted on pride, and that the fastest way to guarantee a meeting was to suggest cowardice. The Emperor smiled. Finally, someone who understood how gods thought. He teleported, not through the warp, but through sheer psychic force bending space around him. The transition was rougher than it should have been. Marvel's dimensional barriers resisted his methods, forcing him to push harder. He materialized in Castle Doom's throne room with enough force to crack the marble floor. Doom sat waiting, fingers steepled, surrounded by technology that hummed with barely restrained power. Dramatic entrance. I approve. Though you will reimburse Latveria for the floor repairs. You summoned me with an insult. I answered with property damage. We are even. Even? No, Emperor. We are intrigued. Doom rose, his presence commanding, despite standing before a being who towered over him. Strange speaks of you as a threat. Stark fears you as a tyrant. But Doom recognizes you as something far more interesting, a fellow architect of civilization who understands that humanity requires guidance, not coddling. The Emperor studied Doom with renewed interest. Here was a human who had seized control of a nation and transformed it from a war-torn backwater into a technological marvel. Education, healthcare, and security provided to every citizen at the cost of absolute obedience. It was the Imperium in miniature, successful precisely because of its limited scale. You rule through fear and competence, the Emperor observed. Your people obey because rebellion is futile and their lives are measurably better under your dominion. Efficient, but ultimately limited. One nation is not a species. What happens when you die? Doom does not die. He said it with such absolute conviction that for a moment, even the Emperor wondered if he had discovered the secret of perpetuity. but I take your meaning. Succession is the eternal problem of monarchy. You attempted to solve it by creating demigod sons. I witnessed that failure in your memories. Strange was quite thorough in his scrying before I appropriated the data from his sanctum's defenses. You spied on the Sorcerer Supreme. I observed a fool examining a treasure he lacked the vision to properly utilize. Your knowledge? Emperor, 38,000 years of human history, technological development, strategic doctrine, genetic engineering secrets. You are a walking repository of empire-building methodology, and you wasted observing this world like a tourist. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You wish me to share my knowledge, to help you expand your rule beyond Latveria? No. Doom's voice carried genuine surprise. I wish us to share a conversation between equals. Two rulers who understand that vision without power is hallucination, and power without vision is barbarism. Stark builds suits to feel adequate. Strange manipulates magic to pretend he controls chaos. But you and I? We have shouldered the burden of guiding lesser minds toward greatness. We alone understand the weight of that crown. It was masterfully done. The appeal to shared experience, the acknowledgement of burden, the implicit understanding that both of them were isolated by their own superiority. Doom was manipulating him, but he was doing it with such skill that the Emperor found himself respecting the attempt. You believe we are alike, the Emperor said. We are not. You rule thousands. I ruled trillions. You have conquered one nation. I conquered a galaxy. You have lived decades. I have lived millennia. We are not peers, Doom. We are not equals. No, Doom agreed. We are not equals. I have succeeded in my vision. You have failed in yours. The temperature in the throne room dropped. Frost formed on the windows. Doom's technology began to fail as the Emperor's psychic presence surged, overwhelming systems designed to withstand celestial-level threats. Every Doombot in the castle went on high alert. Weapons charged, shields activated. Doom did not move, did not flinch, did not show fear. Strike me down if you must, he said calmly, but we both know you came here for truth, not flattery. So here's truth, Emperor. You spent 40,000 years guiding humanity, and your greatest achievement was a civilization so fragile it began to collapse the moment you couldn't hold its hand. I have ruled Latveria for 2 decades, and it would endure a century without me because I built systems, not dependencies. Your empire worshipped you as a god. Mine respects me as a man. The difference is stability. The psychic pressure remained, crushing, suffocating. A lesser human would have been reduced to a gibbering wreck. But Doom's mind was protected by technology, magic, and sheer force of will layered in ways that reminded the Emperor uncomfortably of his own mental defenses. You dare. I dare because someone must. Doom's iron mask reflected the Emperor's golden radiance. You sit in judgment of this world, deciding whether it deserves to remain free or requires your tyranny. But who judges you, Emperor? Who holds you accountable for 10,000 years of torture you could have ended by simply letting yourself die? For an empire built on genocide and justified by necessity? For sons you created to be weapons and then condemned when they acted like weapons? You know nothing of what I endured, what I sacrificed. I know you sacrificed others far more readily than yourself. I know you claim to love humanity while treating humans as resources. I know you speak of necessary evil while refusing to acknowledge that necessary is what tyrants tell themselves to sleep at night. Doom stood, walking toward the Emperor despite the crushing psychic pressure. I am a tyrant, Emperor. I do not pretend otherwise. I rule through force and fear because I believe I know better than my subjects. And I do. But I do not lie to myself about what I am. Can you say the same? The Emperor stared at this mortal who dared lecture him on self-awareness, who dared compare his petty kingdom to the Imperium of man, who dared suggest that the master of mankind was anything less than humanity's greatest champion. And slowly, the psychic pressure receded. You are either the bravest human I have encountered in this universe, the Emperor said quietly, or the most foolish. Perhaps both. Doom is never foolish, arrogant certainly, but every boast I make is backed by achievement. He gestured to a table where servants, or doombots disguised as servants, had laid out food and wine. Sit, eat. We are not friends, but we need not be enemies. Not yet. The Emperor considered refusing, but curiosity stayed his hand. This Victor von Doom was unlike any human he had encountered here. A perfect synthesis of ambition, intellect, and self-awareness wrapped in sufficient power to be genuinely dangerous. He sat. Doom poured wine with his own hands, a gesture of respect between monarchs. Tell me, Emperor, in your universe, how many species did you exterminate in the name of human supremacy? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. I did not keep count after the first millennium of the Great Crusade. And did any of them deserve survival? The question hung in the air. The Emperor considered lying, then realized Doom would detect it. Some possessed beauty, intelligence, culture, but they were not human, and humanity required living space, required resources, required security from potential future threats. So they died. The logic of empire, Doom said approvingly. Brutal but honest. This universe's heroes would call you a monster for such admissions. They cling to the fantasy that all life is precious, that coexistence is always possible. Fools, resources are finite, territories limited, conflict is inevitable. Yet you have not attempted to conquer beyond Latveria. Because I am not a fool. Doom sipped his wine. The moment I expand aggressively, I unite my enemies against me. Stark, Strange, the X-Men, the Avengers, separately manageable, together catastrophic. So I wait, I build, I prepare. When I finally move, it will be with such overwhelming advantage that resistance becomes impossible. This is the difference between us, Emperor. You conquered through force and speed. I shall conquer through patience and inevitability. You shall fail. They will stop you. Perhaps. But if I fail, I will fail as myself. Not as a broken god locked in a torture device of my own creation, watching my empire rot for 10,000 years. The Emperor's hand clenched around his wine glass. It shattered, crystal and liquid pouring across the table. Doom did not react, merely gestured for a servant to clean the mess. You push dangerously close to my limits, Doom. Because your limits need pushing. You arrived in this universe carrying the weight of 48,000 years of trauma, and instead of addressing it, you immediately began judging whether this world needs you to fix it. But Emperor, and I say this as one ruler to another, you cannot fix anything until you admit what you are. Not a savior, not a guardian, a warlord who mistakes control for protection. And what are you, Doom? A philosopher king who believes his own mythology? No. I am a man who clawed his way from poverty and powerlessness to absolute authority through genius and will. Who sees the world suffering and knows that he possesses the intellect to solve it? Who understands that sometimes freedom must be sacrificed for survival? We are alike in that, Emperor. The difference is that I acknowledge the price, while you hide behind necessity." The Emperor stood, the conversation clearly ending. "You have given me much to consider, and much to despise about you. The feeling is mutual, but despise me or not, you will remember this conversation. Because when you finally decide whether to conquer or depart, you will ask yourself, am I repeating my mistakes? Or am I brave enough to make new ones?" The Emperor teleported away without another word, leaving Doom alone in his throne room. The monarch waited until his presence had fully departed before speaking to the empty air. Jarvis equivalent analysis. A holographic display materialized. Subject exhibits psychological markers consistent with post-traumatic stress, messianic complex, and unresolved guilt. Threat assessment. Omega level if provoked. Recommendation. Continue diplomatic engagement while preparing containment protocols. Doom waved the display away. He had not lied to the Emperor. They were alike. Both brilliant, both burdened, both absolutely convinced of their own necessity. But where Doom had learned to wait, the Emperor had only learned to endure. And that made him the more dangerous of the two. The Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters sat on sprawling grounds in Westchester, a mansion that served as school, sanctuary, and fortress for mutant kind. The Emperor had been observing it from a distance for hours, his psychic senses carefully probing the building's defenses while remaining undetected. It was harder than he anticipated. The telepath inside, Professor Charles Xavier, his research indicated, was formidable. Not on the level of the Emperor's own psychic might, but sophisticated in ways that suggested centuries of practice compressed into a mere lifetime. Xavier's mind touched every consciousness in the building with gentle, constant monitoring. A psychic early warning system that would detect hostile intent before it could manifest. The Emperor respected that. So he approached without hostility, broadcasting peaceful curiosity rather than threat. He walked up the long driveway as a visitor, not an invader. The mansion's front door opened before he reached it. A woman stood in the entrance, late 20s, white hair cascading past her shoulders, eyes that glowed faintly with power. Storm, his knowledge supplied. Weather manipulation, leadership capabilities, survivor of trauma who had forged herself into something stronger. "Professor Xavier asks that you enter peacefully," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to facing threats. "He's been aware of your presence in our world since you arrived. He wishes to speak. I mean you no harm. That's what beings of immense power always say, right before cities burn." But she stepped aside, gesturing him inward. "He's waiting in his study. Try not to terrify the students. Some of them are children." The Emperor entered, immediately cataloging defensive positions, power signatures, potential threats. He detected at least 40 mutants within the building, teenagers and young adults radiating various levels of mutation. Some barely registered as different from baseline humans. Others pulsed with enough power to level city blocks. They were beautiful. Humanity's next evolutionary step, occurring naturally rather than through his genetic engineering. The Emperor had spent millennia perfecting the gene craft that produced his custodians and Astartes. Yet nature had simply evolved past humanity on its own. The implications were staggering. A young girl, perhaps 13, with skin that shifted between flesh and diamond, stared at him from a doorway. The Emperor met her gaze and saw fear, but also defiance. She would not run, would not hide. Despite facing something that terrified her, she stood her ground. "You are brave," he told her quietly. "That will serve you well." She blinked, surprised, then retreated into a classroom where an older mutant was teaching mathematics. Normal life, continuing despite the cosmic entity walking their halls. It was so different from the Imperium's paranoid isolation that the Emperor felt a pang of something he had not experienced in millennia. Envy. Storm led him to a wood-paneled study where a man in a wheelchair waited. Professor Charles Xavier, bald, middle-aged, eyes that carried the weight of too many minds touched, too many tragedies witnessed. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit. Would you prefer I call you Emperor? Or is there a name you used before humanity began worshipping you?" The Emperor settled into the chair, which creaked under his mass. "I have had many names. So many that I no longer remember which was first. Emperor will suffice." "Very well." Xavier steepled his fingers, studying him with open curiosity rather than fear. "I've been monitoring your activities since your arrival. Your conversation with Stephen Strange, your assessment of Tony Stark, your philosophical debate with Victor Von Doom. You're searching for something, but I don't think even you know what it is yet. You presume much for a mortal telepath. I presume nothing, I observe." Xavier's consciousness brushed against the Emperor's mind, not invasively, but gently, like a handshake. "May I?" The Emperor considered, then lowered his outer defenses slightly. Not enough to be vulnerable, but enough to allow communication. Xavier's mind touched his, and the professor gasped. What Xavier felt was an ocean, 48,000 years of memory, experience, triumph, and anguish, compressed into a single consciousness. He saw the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy. He felt the Emperor's love for his sons and his anguish at their betrayal. He witnessed 10,000 years on the Golden Throne, every second an eternity of torment. He saw humanities, trillions upon trillions, living and dying under the Emperor's rule, their suffering and achievements all recorded in his perfect memory. Xavier withdrew, tears streaming down his face. "My God, you've carried all of that alone. For so long. I am perpetual. I endure what mortals cannot. No one should endure that." Xavier wiped his eyes, composing himself. "You came to my school because you wanted to understand mutants, why we exist, why humans haven't exterminated us, why I teach children instead of leading armies. In my universe, mutation was corruption, the touch of the warp, or genetic degradation from old night. I purged it wherever found because it threatened humanity's genetic integrity. Yet here, mutation is evolution, progress. How do you reconcile that with baseline human fear?" Xavier smiled sadly. "We don't. Not fully. Humans fear us because we represent their obsolescence. Some of my students have been hunted, beaten, murdered by those who should have protected them. But instead of responding with extermination, we respond with education, with hope, with the belief that coexistence is possible if we simply refuse to give up on each other. Hope is not a strategy. No, it's something better. It's a choice." Xavier wheeled himself to the window, looking out at students playing in the yard. A young man threw fire from his hands, playing catch with someone who absorbed and redirected it harmlessly. "You see them? They could level this mansion if they lost control. Some of them have, accidentally, before they learned discipline. But I don't imprison them. I don't conscript them into armies. I teach them to control their gifts and choose their own paths. Some become heroes. Some become teachers. Some simply want normal lives, and that's their right. You're right. In my Imperium, such power would be identified early, and the child would be taken for psychic training or military conscription. Individual choice is luxury humanity cannot afford when extinction lurks at every corner. And how did that work out? Xavier turned back to face him, his expression gentle but unyielding. You built an empire on necessity, on sacrifice, on the principle that individual liberty must bow to collective survival, and it failed. Your sons betrayed you. Your empire became the nightmare you fought to prevent. Perhaps the problem wasn't that you didn't control enough. Perhaps it was that you tried to control too much. The Emperor stood, agitation rippling through his psychic presence. You speak from ignorance. You have not witnessed the horrors that lurk beyond your atmosphere. The Celestials above Earth could exterminate you on a whim. The dimensional barriers between your world and others barely hold. I detected at least 3 Omega-level threats in orbit during my observations. You survived not through your methods, but despite them. Or perhaps we survived because of them. Xavier's voice remained calm, a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a stubborn student. You see threats everywhere because you've spent 48,000 years fighting. But what if, and I know this is difficult for you to conceive, what if humanity doesn't need a general anymore? What if it needs a teacher? I tried teaching. I created the Imperial truth, spreading enlightenment and rationality across the galaxy. It was corrupted into religious dogma the moment I could no longer enforce it. Because you taught through conquest, through force. You gave humanity knowledge but demanded obedience in return. That's not teaching, that's indoctrination. Xavier gestured to a photograph on his desk. The X-Men, his students who had become heroes, standing together and smiling. I teach these children that their power comes with responsibility, yes, but also with choice, with the freedom to fail, to grow, to become whoever they wish to be. Some make mistakes, some spectacular ones, but they learn from them in ways your Astartes never could, because your warriors were never allowed to make mistakes in the first place. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, thoughtful. You believe freedom creates resilience. I believe control creates brittleness. A controlled system optimizes for one scenario, the one the controller envisions. But reality rarely cooperates with our visions. A free system, chaotic as it is, adapts, evolves, survives in ways the controller never imagined because it wasn't limited by one person's imagination. Chaos is the enemy. I have fought it for millennia. No, stagnation is the enemy. Chaos is just change without structure. But structure without change, that's death. Your Imperium died the moment you stopped being able to change it. Xavier's eyes met his, and for the first time, the Emperor saw not fear or awe, but pity. You're not really judging whether our world needs saving. You're trying to determine whether your entire life's work was wrong. And you're terrified the answer is yes. The Emperor's fist clenched. The air in the study grew thick with psychic pressure. Xavier's wheelchair began to vibrate. Outside, students stopped playing, sensing the disturbance. You go too far, Xavier. Perhaps, but someone needs to. Because if you keep walking this path, if you decide we need your brand of salvation, you won't be saving us. You'll be repeating your trauma on a new set of victims. Xavier showed no fear, only compassion. You're hurting, Emperor. You've been hurting for 10,000 years. And hurt people hurt people. It's the oldest pattern in human psychology. I am not human. You're the most human being I've ever met. You're just buried under 48,000 years of refusing to admit you can be wrong. The Emperor turned away, unable to face the telepath's unflinching honesty. His gaze found the window, the students outside, their laughter filtering through the glass. One of them, the girl with diamond skin, was showing off, shifting between forms while others applauded. In the Imperium, she would have been examined, tested, potentially vivisected to understand her mutation. Here, she was simply celebrated. "I need time," the Emperor said finally, "to process what I have learned here. Of course, the door is always open if you wish to return." "An Emperor?" Xavier's voice softened. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what you endured, for what you became, for the weight you've carried alone for so long. You deserved better than the universe gave you." The Emperor left without responding, unable to trust his voice. He walked past students who watched him with curiosity rather than terror, past Storm, who nodded respectfully, out into the fading afternoon light. And for the first time since he had fallen into this universe, the Emperor of mankind felt something he had not felt since before the Horus Heresy, doubt. The Emperor wandered for 3 days. He did not return to the cities where heroes watched for his presence. He did not seek out more philosophers to challenge his worldview. Instead, he walked the wilderness, forests in the Pacific Northwest, deserts in Nevada, frozen tundra in Alaska, places where humanity's touch was light and the earth itself spoke in languages older than civilization. He needed silence, space to think without the constant noise of 7 billion minds pressing against his consciousness, space to confront the questions Xavier had forced him to acknowledge. What if he had been wrong? Not wrong in tactics. He had conquered a galaxy after all, not wrong in capability. He had held shut the webway breach for 10,000 years through sheer will. But wrong in philosophy. Wrong in the fundamental assumption that had guided every decision across 48 millennia, that humanity required his control to survive. The Emperor sat on a mountaintop in the Rockies, snow falling around him, and did something he had not done since before the Unification Wars. He remembered who he had been before he became the Emperor. A shaman. That was the truth buried beneath 48,000 years of rulership. He had been one of many, a collective of psychers who performed a ritual suicide to merge their souls and create something that could guide humanity through the age of strife. He had been born from consensus, from humanity choosing to create a protector, not conquer itself with one. When had that changed? When had the Guardian become the tyrant? Somewhere during the Unification Wars, when he realized humanity would not unite willingly. They clung to their warlords, their techno-barbarian kings, their religions, and tribal identities. So he had crushed them, brought them to heel, forced unity because voluntary unity seemed impossible. And it had worked. Terra was unified. The Great Crusade reclaimed the stars. Humanity thrived under his rule, until it didn't. Until his sons, creations of his own genetic genius, became the very warlords he had destroyed on Terra. Until his imperial truth became the imperial cult. Until his dream of enlightenment calcified into the nightmare of blind faith and stagnation. The Emperor looked at his hands, hands that had strangled the last priest on Terra, hands that had crafted the Primarchs, hands that had been forced to kill his most beloved son on the vengeful spirit. How much blood had these hands spilled in the name of necessity? All of it necessary. He still believed that. Without his intervention, humanity would have destroyed itself during Old Night. The Xenos would have exterminated them. chaos would have consumed them. But Xavier's words echoed. You gave humanity survival. Did you give them anything worth surviving for? His meditation shattered as psychic alarms screamed through his consciousness. Something vast and malevolent had just breached Earth's atmosphere. Something that made even the Celestials' passive observation seem benign by comparison. The Emperor stood, extending his senses. There, over New York City, a massive dimensional rift, and through it poured creatures he recognized with a sickening lurch of his hearts. Demons. Not from his universe's warp, but close enough. Extra-dimensional entities of pure malevolence, feeding on fear and death, led by something that registered as a greater demon equivalent. This was impossible. Marvel's dimensional barriers should have prevented such an incursion, unless... The Emperor's mind raced. Unless his arrival had weakened those barriers. His psychic presence, calibrated for a universe where the warp was reality's constant companion, had been unconsciously eroding the metaphysical boundaries between Marvel's dimensions. He had created a bridge for these entities to exploit. This was his fault. The Emperor teleported instantly, space folding around him, materializing above Manhattan as the rift expanded. Below, he could see the Avengers mobilizing. Iron Man in the air, Captain America coordinating evacuations, Thor summoning lightning. They were brave, skilled. Against conventional threats, perhaps even sufficient. But these were not conventional threats. A demon the size of a building emerged from the rift, all teeth and tentacles and wrongness that made reality scream. It bellowed in frequencies that shattered windows and sent humans fleeing in primal terror. Behind it, dozens more poured through, smaller but no less deadly. The Emperor watched Thor engage the greater demon, Mjolnir striking with enough force to level buildings. The demon laughed, actually laughed, and backhanded the god into a skyscraper. Iron Man's repulsors washed over another creature, causing damage, but not enough. Captain America's shield bounced uselessly off hide that existed partially in another dimension. They were losing. The Emperor could intervene, could close the rift with a thought. Could banish these entities back to their hellish dimension with the same ease he had wielded against chaos demons for millennia. He possessed the power and knowledge to end this in minutes. But should he? This was the test he had been waiting for. The proof that would determine whether this universe's methods worked or whether it needed his salvation. If Earth's heroes could triumph without him, perhaps Xavier was right. Perhaps freedom and hope were sufficient defenses. If they failed, if millions died because he had withheld his power, then he would have his answer about necessary intervention. The greater demon turned its attention to the fleeing civilians, preparing to feast. The Emperor saw a school bus trapped in traffic, children screaming inside, the creature's massive clawed hand descending. No. The Emperor moved. He appeared between the demon and the bus, catching the creature's claw in one hand. The demon howled in surprise as psychic fire erupted from the Emperor's palm, burning not flesh, but the creature's essential nature. This was not hellfire or repulsor energy. This was the anathema, the light of pure human will that had held the webway shut for 10,000 years. The demon recoiled, its scream now one of pain rather than hunger. "You shall not have them," the Emperor said quietly. Then, amplifying his voice psychically so every hero on the battlefield could hear, "Fall back. Protect the civilians. I will handle this." Thor, pulling himself from rubble, stared in shock. Iron Man's sensors went haywire trying to classify the energy signature. But they were warriors. They recognized both authority and capability when they saw it. they fell back. The Emperor rose into the air, golden light blazing around him like a second sun. He extended his psychic senses to the rift, understanding its structure in an instant. It was crude. A tear forced through dimensional barriers by brute force, sustained by the entity's collective will. In his universe, such rifts required complex rituals and massive psychic investment. Here, the barriers were simply weaker. His fault, his presence, his responsibility. The Emperor reached into the rift and began to close it. The demons screamed, recognizing the method, if not the man. They surged toward him, dozens of entities attacking as one. He destroyed them, not with weapons, not with armies, just his will, made manifest. Each demon that touched his golden aura simply ceased to exist. Their essential wrongness, unable to withstand the psychic might of humanity's collective hope and fury, channeled through a single being. The greater demon, more intelligent than its lesser kin, attempted to bargain. "Ancient One," it hissed in a language that hurt to hear. "We can sense your pain, your doubt. Join us. We offer what your species denied you." The Emperor's hand closed around the demon's essence. "I have fought chaos gods and survived. I have stared into the eye of terror and not blinked. You are nothing. You will always be nothing, and you will leave this place." He tore the demon apart, psychic by psychic component, ensuring it could never reform. Then he turned his full attention to the rift and pulled, forcing the dimensional tear closed through sheer force of will. Reality screamed. The barriers between worlds protested, but the Emperor had held worse breaches, and he would not fail here. The rift collapsed. Silence fell over Manhattan, broken only by distant sirens and the groans of damaged buildings. The Emperor descended slowly, his radiance fading to a dim glow. Below, the Avengers gathered, weapons ready but not raised. Wary, waiting. He landed before them, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Captain America stepped forward. "Thank you. You saved a lot of lives today. I caused this." The Emperor's voice was heavy with self-recrimination. "My presence in your universe weakened the dimensional barriers. Those entities exploited the breach I created. The blood spilled today is on my hands." "You're saying you accidentally invited demons to Earth?" Stark's voice was carefully controlled. "And your response is to what? Apologize? That's not exactly comforting." "I am saying I created a problem, and I solved it. But the fundamental issue remains. My presence here is destabilizing your reality. I do not belong in this universe." Thor, still dusting off rubble, studied him with the gaze of someone who had walked among gods. "You fought with the fury of Odin and the precision of Heimdall. You are a warrior of great renown, though you wear no familiar face. What manner of being are you?" "I am a mistake," the Emperor said quietly. "A ruler who believed himself a savior. A father who created sons as weapons. A guardian who became a tyrant. I am proof that immortality and wisdom do not correlate." "Heavy words," Captain America said. "But actions speak louder. You saved those children. You closed the breach. That counts for something. Does it? I possess the power to protect this world from every threat you face. I could close every dimensional rift, destroy every cosmic menace, guide humanity to a golden age. Should I? Because today proved that my restraint has costs. Those civilians who died before I acted, they died because I hesitated." "No," a new voice said. The Emperor turned to see Dr. Strange descending in a swirl of golden sparks. "They died because entities from another dimension attacked. You didn't create those creatures' hunger. You just gave them an opening. But you also stopped them. The question isn't whether you have power. Clearly you do. The question is what you're going to do with it. The Emperor looked at each of them. Heroes who fought without his genetic enhancement, without his millennia of experience, with nothing but courage and determination. They had been losing before he intervened, but they had been fighting. "I need to leave," he said finally. "My presence endangers your reality. I will find a way to return to my own universe, or I will find an empty dimension where my power will not cause collateral damage." "Wait." Stark's faceplate retracted. "You're just going to leave? After proving you can actually help?" "I am leaving because I have learned what I needed to learn. You asked what I would do with my power, sorcerer. I choose to remove it from your equation. This world survives through the choices of individuals, not the will of gods. I will not corrupt that, no matter how much I disagree with it." "That's..." Captain America paused, searching for words. "That's actually the most heroic thing I've heard in a long time." The Emperor smiled, bitter and sad. "No, Captain. It is simply the first time in 48,000 years that I have admitted I might not know best. Do not mistake exhaustion for heroism." He turned to leave, preparing to teleport away. But Thor's voice stopped him. "Warrior, what is your name? So that Asgard might remember the one who defended Midgard this day?" The Emperor looked back at the god of thunder. "I have had many names, but the one I should have remembered is the first, Shaman, Guardian, not Emperor." He vanished, leaving Earth's heroes standing amid the rubble, processing what they had witnessed. And high above, the Celestial that had been watching tilted its head, recognizing something it had not expected to see. A god learning to doubt its own divinity. The Emperor retreated to a place beyond easy reach. The dark side of the moon, where Earth's presence was a distant blue marble, and the cosmic silence pressed against even his vast consciousness. Here, he could think without the constant noise of humanity's hopes and fears bleeding into his psyche. He had made a decision. He would leave this universe. But the question of how consumed him. The dimensional breach that had torn him from the Golden Throne was not something he could simply reverse. That rift had been catastrophic, unrepeatable, likely caused by the intersection of chaos plots, warp storms, and his own unconscious desire to escape 10,000 years of agony. To return home meant either finding another such convergence or creating one deliberately. The Emperor extended his senses across dimensional barriers, feeling for the signature of his home universe. There, a faint psychic echo, like hearing one's name whispered across infinite distance. The 41st millennium still existed, though what state his Imperium had reached without him was unknowable from here. He began gathering power for the transit, pulling energy from the surrounding space, when a presence manifested before him. Not through teleportation or mystical portal, but through simple, instantaneous existence. The Celestial called Arishem, the judge stood upon the lunar surface, 2,000 feet of cosmic authority made manifest. This close, the Emperor could feel the weight of its consciousness, ancient beyond human reckoning, containing the memories of billion-year experiments and trillion soul judgments. It spoke, not in words, but in pure conceptual transmission that bypassed language entirely. "You flee. I withdraw. There is a difference. Negation. You flee from knowledge that threatens your identity construct. Standard behavior for entities confronting paradigm invalidation." The Emperor's eyes blazed with golden fire. "You presume to psychoanalyze me? I am older than your youngest subjects. I have guided humanity since before your kind planted the deviant seed on Earth. Correction. You are 48,000 local years in linear existence. I am 2.6 billion years extant. Your ancient status is relative. You are to me as a mayfly to you, brief, limited, convinced of significance. The Emperor could have attacked. Should have, by the logic that had governed his existence for millennia. One did not tolerate Xenos condescension. One did not debate with aliens about humanity's worth. One conquered or destroyed. But he was tired. So very tired. What do you want, Celestial? If you have come to judge me, make your assessment and be done with it. Observation sharing. You are aberration. You arrive from alternate continuum, destabilize dimensional barriers, demonstrate Omega-class psychic capability, yet choose self-exile rather than dominion. This conflicts with probability models. Beings of your power classification typically attempt conquest. Why do you deviate? Because I have already conquered. I spent 40,000 years building the greatest human empire imaginable, and I watched it rot around me while I was powerless to stop it. I will not repeat that mistake on someone else's humanity. Clarification requested. Your empire construct failed due to rebellion of created servitors, correct? Your sons betrayed core programming. They were not machines, they were my sons. I made them too well, gave them intelligence, emotion, individuality. And then I treated them as tools rather than people. The failure was mine, not theirs. The Celestial was silent for a moment, an actual pause in its perpetual consciousness. When it spoke again, something had shifted in its conceptual tone. Statement of relevance. I have seeded 847,000 worlds with life potential across multiple galaxies and timescales. Of those, I have been forced to judge 23,000 failures, civilizations that deviated from optimal development paths and required termination. Each judgment is necessary. Each judgment is correct. Yet I calculate with 94.7% certainty that if I possessed your emotional architecture, I would classify these judgments as failure, as loss. Your framework processes this as guilt. I lack referent for internal experience, but recognize external manifestation. The Emperor stared at the cosmic entity, understanding dawning. You are trying to understand regret. You destroy civilizations and wonder why it troubles you. Affirmative. You destroy civilizations and understand why it troubles you. You possess data I lack. Analysis indicates your emotional suffering is outcome of gap between ideal state and actual state. You desired to save. You achieved control. The gap generates persistent psychological damage. That is surprisingly accurate for a being that claims no emotional referent. I observe emotions. I do not experience them. Your species is 67% more likely to survive when governed by emotional drives rather than pure logic. Paradoxical, but statistically verified. Yet emotions also generate suboptimal individual decisions. You represent extreme case study, emotion-driven decision-making in being with logic capacity comparable to celestial baseline. The Emperor sat on the lunar surface, an unconscious gesture of informality that surprised even him. You want to know if emotion is strength or weakness. Reframe. I want to comprehend if your suffering serves purpose. If your guilt and doubt are system failures or system features. You nearly died from these emotions, yet they now prevent you from repeating original error pattern. Is this optimal evolutionary development? For the first time in this conversation, the Emperor laughed, a sound that carried across the airless void through pure psychic resonance. You are asking the wrong being, Celestial. I have spent 48,000 years convinced that emotion was humanity's greatest weakness, that logic and will should guide all decisions, and it led me to become a monster in the name of salvation. But you changed. This universe's humans showed you alternate paradigm. You accepted data that contradicted 48,000 years of experience integration. This is impossible for celestial architecture. We are too vast to change core protocols. Yet you, despite comparable power and greater temporal investment, chose modification over consistency. How? The Emperor looked back at Earth, at the small blue world where Xavier taught children to choose their own paths, where Stark built armor to supplement his humanity rather than replace it, where Strange guarded freedom rather than imposing order. I changed because I was wrong, and I was finally humble enough to admit it. That is the difference between us, Celestial. You are eternal and immutable. I am eternal and broken. Broken things can be reshaped. Perfect things can only shatter. Profound statement. I will integrate into conceptual models. The Celestial began to fade, its judgment apparently complete. Final query. Will you return to Origin Universe? Yes. My Imperium is likely collapsing without the Astronomicon. Trillions will die. I cannot save them. I may be the reason they are doomed. But I will witness it. I owe them that much. Prediction. You will attempt to save them despite stated intention not to interfere. You possess hope that alternate methodology will succeed where previous approach failed. This is irrational but statistically probable for your psychology type. Perhaps, or perhaps I will simply die with them. I am perpetual, but even perpetuity can be ended with sufficient force, and a galaxy collapsing into chaos might finally be enough. Inefficient, but comprehensible. The Celestial vanished, not departing but simply ceasing to be present, leaving the Emperor alone with his thoughts and his decision. He would return home. But first, there was one final matter to address. The Emperor stood and teleported not to Earth, but to a place between places. The space where Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum touched multiple dimensions simultaneously. He materialized in Strange's meditation chamber, where the Sorcerer Supreme sat in lotus position, surrounded by floating mandalas of defensive magic. Strange's eyes opened. I wondered when you'd come to say goodbye. You were certain I would leave? I was certain you'd try. Whether you succeed is another question. Strange stood, dismissing the protective spells with a gesture. The dimensional barriers you weakened are repairing themselves now that you're not actively present on Earth. But the damage isn't complete. There are still hairline fractures that could become problems in the future. I can seal them before I depart. I know. That's why I'm not trying to stop you. Strange walked to a window that showed not New York, but the dark dimensions beyond reality. You saved the city today. Saved those children. That counts for something. I endangered them first. The mathematics do not favor me. The mathematics never do when you're measuring good deeds against bad. There's always more harm to prevent than good to create. That's why we try anyway. Strange turned back to face him. I saw your universe, Emperor. I saw what you were trying to prevent. The Chaos Gods, the demon incursions, the endless war. You weren't wrong about the threats. But I was wrong about the solution. Maybe. Or maybe your solution worked until it didn't. And you weren't able to adapt because you'd built a system that depended on you being right. That's the danger of absolute power. It makes you too important to question. Strange's expression softened. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're a tragedy. And I hope you find a better ending than the one you left behind." The Emperor extended his hand, a gesture of respect between equals. Strange took it, and for a moment, psychic and mystical energies intertwined. Two forms of power acknowledging their kinship. "Protect them," the Emperor said quietly. "Not by controlling them, not by deciding what they need. Just protect their right to choose, even when their choices are foolish. That's all we've ever been trying to do." The Emperor released Strange's hand and began gathering the energy needed for dimensional transit. "I will seal the breaches I created. Your reality will be safer after my departure than it was before my arrival. Consider it an apology written in metaphysics." Apology accepted. "And Emperor?" Strange's voice carried genuine warmth. "Thank you. For changing. For trying. For proving that even gods can learn." The Emperor said nothing, but the golden light that surrounded him flickered in what might have been acknowledgement or gratitude. He extended his consciousness across Earth one final time, touching briefly on the minds he had encountered. Stark's brilliant paranoia, Xavier's compassionate wisdom, Doom's calculating ambition, Storm's fierce protectiveness. Each of them had taught him something. Each had held up a mirror to his 10,000 years of certainty and shown him the cracks. He reached into the dimensional barriers, finding each fracture his presence had caused. With surgical precision, he sealed them, reinforcing the walls between worlds with psychic architecture that would endure for millennia. It took hours, but time was something he had in abundance. When the work was complete, he opened a rift back to his own universe. Not to Terra, but to the edges of the galaxy, where he could observe before deciding whether to intervene. The tier in reality blazed with golden light, and through it he could see the distant stars of the Imperium. And the darkness between them, so much darker than it should have been. He stepped toward the portal, then paused. On impulse, he reached back psychically and left a gift, a fragment of his knowledge encoded in psychic crystals scattered across Earth. Information about genetic engineering, dimensional theory, strategic doctrine. Not enough to turn humanity into conquerors, but enough to help them defend themselves better. It was a compromise between his old philosophy and his new understanding. Guidance without control, protection without domination. Then he stepped through the portal, and the dimensional rift sealed behind him with a finality that made reality sigh in relief. The Emperor of Mankind had left the Marvel Universe. But the questions he carried and the answers he had found would shape whatever came next in ways neither universe could predict. The Emperor emerged from the dimensional breach into a galaxy dying by degrees. He materialized in the void between stars, in a region that should have been illuminated by the Astronomican's psychic light. Instead, there was only darkness. Not the natural darkness of space, but the wrongness of warp corruption bleeding through reality's thinning skin. His psychic senses extended outward, cataloging the catastrophe. Without him to anchor the Astronomican, the beacon had failed within hours of his disappearance. Warp travel had become impossibly dangerous. Ships that attempted to navigate the Immaterium without the guiding light had been lost by the thousands, their crews either destroyed by demonic incursion or trapped in temporal anomalies that would see them emerge centuries too late. The Imperium was fragmenting. Cut off from central authority and unable to coordinate across the vast distances of space, sector governments had declared independence or fallen to internal strife. He could sense the psychic signatures of civil wars erupting on 100 worlds. Space Marine chapters, unable to receive orders from Terra, had become warlords in their own right. Some defending their territories with desperate nobility, others embracing the very tyranny they had been created to prevent. And Terra? The Emperor turned his attention toward humanity's cradle world and felt his ancient hearts constrict. The Imperial Palace was under siege. The webway breach he had held closed for 10,000 years had finally overwhelmed the remaining defenses. Demons poured through in endless waves, and though the Adeptus Custodes fought with legendary skill, they were being pushed back meter by meter. The throne world was falling. The Emperor could save it, could teleport directly to the throne room, seal the breach with his returned power, restore the Astronomicon, and bring order back to the Imperium through sheer force of will. It would take perhaps a century of direct intervention, but he could rebuild everything, make it stronger, better, correct the mistakes that had led to this collapse. His old self, the Emperor who had left this universe, would have done exactly that without hesitation. But he was no longer that being. The Emperor began moving through the void, not toward Terra, but toward the nearest Imperium world still maintaining some semblance of function. A hive world called Scintilla, capital of the Calixis sector, where he could sense billions of minds locked in desperate prayer. They were praying to him, to the God Emperor, begging for salvation that would not come because the object of their worship had abandoned them. The irony was not lost on him. He had fought his entire existence to prevent humanity from worshiping him as a god. The imperial truth had been built on rationality and science, specifically to combat religious thinking. Yet, in his absence, his Imperium had transformed him into the very thing he despised, a deity demanding faith and sacrifice. And now, when they needed their god most, he was considering letting them fall. The Emperor materialized in orbit above Scintilla, cloaking himself from detection. Below, the hive world's massive cities rose like mountains of metal and stone, housing billions in cramped, polluted squalor. He could feel their suffering, not just from the current crisis, but the endemic misery of imperial life. Starvation, disease, brutal working conditions, lives measured in their utility to the Imperium's war machine. This was what his dream had become. Not enlightenment, but enslavement. Not progress, but stagnation wrapped in holy rhetoric. A Vox transmission caught his attention, a planetary governor addressing his subjects. Citizens of Scintilla, the Emperor tests us in this dark hour. Though the Astronomicon has failed, though demons press at our borders, we must maintain faith. Increase production by 30%. Those who cannot meet quotas will be executed as heretics. The Emperor protects, but only the faithful. The Emperor listened to this pronouncement, faith twisted into threat, his name used to justify murder, and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in millennia. Shame. Not for failing to prevent this specific atrocity, but for creating the system that made such atrocities inevitable. He had built the Imperium to be efficient, unified, and utterly dependent on his guidance. Without him, it had not evolved. It had metastasized, becoming a cancerous parody of his intentions. Xavier's words echoed in his mind. You built paradise, and it curdled into the cruelest regime imaginable. That's not humanity's failing. It's yours. A new presence drew his attention. A strike cruiser emerging from the warp nearby, its shields flickering with barely controlled corruption. The ship bore the heraldry of the Blood Angels, one of his most noble creations. The Emperor extended his senses into the vessel and found its crew on the edge of collapse. They had been attempting to return to their chapter's homeworld when the Astronomicon failed. Caught in the warp without guidance, they had fought demons for what felt like years within the Immaterium's twisted time stream. Of the 1,000 space marines who had departed on crusade, fewer than 300 survived. And all of them were succumbing to the red thirst, the Blood Angel's curse, their genetic flaw that turned them into blood-mad berserkers. Captain Raphael of the 3rd Company stood on the bridge, his noble features twisted with barely suppressed rage. The Emperor could see the struggle within him, the transhuman warrior's discipline warring with genetic imperatives coded into his very cells. Imperatives the Emperor himself had inadvertently created when he designed Sanguinius, the Blood Angel's Primarch father. "My lord," one of the bridge crew said, his voice tight with fear. "The red thirst spreads. 16 more brothers have succumbed. They had to be contained." Contained? Raphael's laugh was bitter. "You mean executed? Brothers I have fought beside for centuries, reduced to animals because our gene father's curse cannot be cured." He turned to face his crew. "The Emperor has abandoned us. The Astronomicon is dark. Terra may have already fallen. We are alone in a dying Imperium, slaves to genetic flaws we never chose. Do not speak heresy, Captain." The ship's chaplain, his skull helmet reflecting the dim emergency lights. "The Emperor protects. He will return. We must maintain faith." "Faith?" Raphael's voice rose to a roar. "I have had faith for 300 years. I have fought in the Emperor's name across 100 worlds. I have watched brothers die screaming prayers that went unanswered. And now I feel my own mind slipping into the red thirst. And I am supposed to believe the Emperor cares? He is either dead, gone, or never cared to begin with." The chaplain raised his Crozius, the weapon crackling with power. "You will recant those words, or I will..." The Emperor materialized on the bridge between them. The effect was instantaneous. Every space marine in the chamber dropped to one knee, their genetically encoded recognition of their creator overriding conscious thought. Even Raphael, consumed by rage and despair, found himself kneeling before he understood why. "Rise," the Emperor said quietly. "All of you." They stood slowly, shock and awe warring on their faces. The chaplain spoke first, his voice shaking. "My lord, you have returned. The prophecies were true. You have come to save. I have come to witness, not to save." The Emperor's voice carried absolute finality. "And I am not your lord, not anymore." Raphael stared at him, rage giving way to confusion. What are you saying?" "I am saying that I was wrong. For 10,000 years, I sat upon the golden throne believing my presence was all that held humanity together. But I see now that my presence, my control, was what prevented humanity from learning to stand on its own." The Emperor met each Space Marine's gaze in turn. "You are warriors of exceptional skill and loyalty. You have fought for an Imperium that treats you as tools and a god who never wanted your worship. And now you face the consequences of a system I designed to be fragile without me. You speak as though you intend to abandon us." The chaplain's voice carried horror and disbelief in equal measure. "The Imperium crumbles, Terra burns, billions die, and you would let it happen? I would let humanity choose its own path, even if that path leads through fire." Raphael stood, his hands clenching into fists. "You condemn us, then. Without the Astronomicon, without central authority, the Imperium will shatter. Xenos will devour the fragments. Chaos will corrupt what remains. Humanity will be extinct within centuries." "Perhaps," Or perhaps you will surprise me? This strike cruiser, you navigated the warp without the Astronomicon and survived. You fought demons for years and maintained your humanity, despite the red thirst. You did this without my direct intervention. What makes you think you could not do it again? Because we are designed to follow. Raphael's voice broke with anguish. You made us to serve, to obey. Without orders, without purpose, we are nothing. The Emperor's expression softened just slightly. No, you are nothing because I made you believe you were nothing without me. That was my greatest crime, not genetic engineering, not conquest, but convincing you that your worth came from serving my vision. He stepped closer to Raphael. You feel the red thirst consuming you. You believe it is a curse, a flaw in your design. But it is not a flaw. It is humanity asserting itself against my genetic programming. You were meant to be perfect weapons. The red thirst is your humanity demanding to be more than a weapon. That makes no sense, the chaplain whispered. The red thirst is madness, bestial rage. How is that humanity? Because humanity is not perfect, is not controllable, is not content to be what others design it to be. The Emperor turned his gaze to each of them. I tried to create perfect humans through the Primarchs and you Astartes. But perfection is incompatible with free will. Every flaw in your gene seed is actually humanity fighting against my attempt to shape it into something it was never meant to be. Silence filled the bridge. Somewhere in the ship's lower decks, a space marine succumbing to the red thirst screamed in rage and anguish. The sound echoed like an accusation. What would you have us do? Raphael asked finally. If you will not lead us, if you will not restore the Imperium, what purpose do we serve? Whatever purpose you choose. The Emperor placed a hand on Raphael's shoulder, a gesture he had not made to one of his space marines in 10 millennia. You are not my tool anymore, Raphael. None of you are. The Imperium is dying, but humanity will survive. It always has. And perhaps, without my control, it will finally become something worth saving. You would let 10,000 years of human achievement crumble to dust? The chaplain's voice carried barely suppressed fury. You would abandon the Imperium you built? I would let humanity discover whether it needs an Imperium at all. The Emperor removed his hand from Raphael's shoulder. I am leaving this galaxy. Not fleeing. I could seal the webway breach, restore the Astronomicon, rebuild everything within a century. But that would only restart the cycle. Another 10,000 years of stagnation, waiting for the next inevitable collapse. Better to let the collapse happen now, while there is still a chance for something new to emerge from the ashes. Where will you go? Raphael's voice was quiet, lost. Somewhere I cannot interfere. Somewhere I cannot impose my will on humanity's development. I have learned, finally, that the greatest gift I can give my species is my absence. The Emperor began to fade, reality bending around him as he prepared to leave this galaxy entirely. But before he vanished completely, he left them with final words. The red thirst need not destroy you. Accept it. Integrate it. Let it remind you that you are human, not machines. And when the Imperium finally falls, remember, you were never meant to serve gods. You were meant to become them. He vanished, leaving the Blood Angels alone on their corrupted ship, staring at the space where their creator and betrayer had stood. Captain Raphael stood motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to laugh, not with madness, but with something that might have been liberation. He abandoned us, Raphael said to his brothers. The God Emperor, the master of mankind, the being we have worshipped for 300 years, just walked away. Heresy, the chaplain whispered. But even he sounded uncertain. No. Raphael turned to face his crew. Honesty. Perhaps the first honest thing he has ever done. He looked at his hands, still trembling with the red thirst's influence. Orders, brothers. We have spent our entire existence following orders. I think it is time we made our own decisions. What would you have us do, Captain? One of the battle brothers asked. Raphael smiled, a human expression on a transhuman face. Something we have never done before. Something terrifying and liberating in equal measure. What's that, my lord? Whatever we want. And in that moment, aboard a dying ship in a collapsing Imperium, the first truly free space marines in 10,000 years began to chart their own course. The Emperor felt this through his receding consciousness and allowed himself the smallest smile. Perhaps there was hope after all. The Emperor did not return to Terra. He did not seal the webway breach. He did not reignite the Astronomicon or restore the Imperium's crumbling infrastructure. Instead, he traveled to the galactic edge, to the void beyond the spiral arms, where stars grew thin and the warp's influence waned to almost nothing. Here, in the emptiness between galaxies, he could observe without interfering, could witness without controlling. He watched. Across the Imperium, the collapse accelerated. Without the Astronomicon, interstellar travel became a desperate gamble. Worlds that had relied on regular shipments for food, medicine, and military support found themselves isolated. Some fell to Xeno's predation, others descended into civil war. A few, a precious few, began to adapt. On Ultramar, Robout Guilliman's gene sons maintained order through the Codex Astartes' organizational principles, creating a pocket empire that functioned without Terra's authority. The Emperor watched his sons' inheritors prove that efficiency and adaptation could coexist. In the Segmentum Solar, the Adeptus Mechanicus fractured into competing forge worlds, each claiming to be the true inheritors of the Omnissiah's knowledge. Without the Imperium's enforced unity, innovation exploded, both brilliant and terrible. The Emperor observed with fascination as technology suppressed for millennia suddenly bloomed in the absence of dogmatic control. The Space Wolves and Dark Angels, chapters that had always walked the line between loyalty and independence, openly declared their autonomy. They established protectorates around their homeworlds, defending local populations not from orders, but from choice. The Emperor saw echoes of his original vision, Astartes as humanity's guardians, not its jailers. And on Terra itself, the final battle raged. The Emperor's consciousness stretched across the void to witness the throne world's last stand. The Imperial Palace burned. 10,000 custodians, all that remained of his personal guard, fought a retreating action through halls they had defended for millennia. Demons of all four chaos gods poured through the webway breach in numbers that should have been impossible. At the center of the palace, in the throne room itself, the golden throne sat empty. Without the Emperor to anchor it, the device had become a beacon for warp entities rather than a barrier against them. The greatest concentration of demonic forces clustered around it, feeding on the residual psychic energy. The Custodian General, last of his guardians still standing, made his final stand before the throne. Valdor's successor, the Emperor, had never learned his name. So focused on his own suffering that he had forgotten to care, fought with skill that would have made the original 10,000 proud. But skill was not enough. It had never been enough. a greater demon of Tzeentch, materialized before the custodian general, its form a shifting mass of impossible geometry and knowing eyes. "The corpse emperor has abandoned you," it said in a voice like crystallized madness. "Your god is dead. Your Imperium is dust. Why do you persist?" The custodian general's guardian spear blazed with golden fire as he struck, carving through demonic essence. Because someone must. Must? There is no must. There is only what is. And what is entropy. The Imperium falls. Humanity fragments. The galaxy belongs to the primordial truth now. Then the galaxy will have to take it from us, one corpse at a time. The custodian general fought on, even as his armor cracked, even as his immortal flesh began to fail. Not from orders, not from programming, from simple, stubborn, magnificent human refusal to yield. The Emperor watched this warrior, a man whose name he did not know, who had spent his entire existence serving an absent god, choose to die protecting an empty throne. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor felt something other than despair or doubt. He felt pride, not the pride of a creator observing his creation, but the pride of a human witnessing another human transcend their limitations through sheer force of will. The custodian general fell. The demons surged forward to claim the golden throne as their trophy. And the Emperor made his final decision. He reached across the void, not with his full power, but with a fraction, a precise, surgical application of psychic might. He did not manifest physically on Terra, did not appear to save the day or restore order. Instead, he did something far simpler. He closed the webway breach, not permanently, not with his own power anchoring the seal. He simply collapsed the passage, forcing the demons already on Terra to fight without reinforcement. It would buy the remaining defenders time, minutes, perhaps hours. What they did with that time would be their choice. But more importantly, he left something behind. A psychic imprint in the warp currents around Terra, not a message in words, but a conceptual transmission that every psyker on the planet would feel. You are not abandoned. You are free. Then he withdrew, letting the Imperium face its fate without his interference. Across the galaxy, events cascaded. The webway breach's closure was felt by every navigator, every astropath, every psyker sensitive to the warp's tides. They did not know what it meant, but they knew something fundamental had changed. On Terra, the remaining defenders rallied, not because they believed the Emperor would save them, but because they finally understood he wouldn't. And in that understanding, they found something the Imperium had lacked for 10 millennia: agency. The Adeptus Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, the Imperial Guard regiments still loyal to Terra. They fought not as servants of a god, but as humans defending their home. The difference was subtle but profound. They made tactical decisions without waiting for divine guidance. They adapted without consulting doctrine. They fought with the desperate creativity of people who knew no one was coming to save them. And slowly, impossibly, they began to turn the tide. The demons, cut off from reinforcement and facing defenders who had finally stopped fighting out of blind faith, began to falter. Chaos thrived on certainty, on minds locked into patterns it could exploit. But humans fighting out of choice, adapting in real time, making decisions based on immediate needs rather than ancient doctrine, that was chaos of a different kind. One even the ruinous powers struggled to corrupt. The Emperor observed this with growing fascination. He had always believed humanity needed unity to survive, needed his guidance. needed absolute control to prevent the chaos that had consumed Old Night. But perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps humanity's strength had never been unity. It had been adaptability, the ability to survive not through order, but through the creative chaos of millions of individuals making their own choices. In the Calixis sector, the planetary governor who had threatened to execute quota failures found himself facing a workers' revolt. Without the Imperium's military might to enforce his authority, he fell within days. The workers who replaced him were inefficient, chaotic, and argued constantly about resource distribution. But they didn't execute anyone for failing to meet quotas. On a forge world in Segmentum Ultima, a Magos who had spent centuries following the Omnissiah's doctrine made a choice: innovate or die. He began experimenting with technology classified as heresy, and discovered that the machine god did not, in fact, strike him down. Other magi, seeing this, began their own experiments. Knowledge suppressed for millennia began to spread. Some of it was dangerous. Some led to disaster. But some created wonders. Across 100 worlds, Space Marine chapters made their own decisions. Some descended into warlordism, becoming the very tyrants they had been created to oppose. Others discovered they could be protectors without being masters. And a few, a precious few, began to question whether they needed to be warriors at all. The Emperor watched it all: the failures and triumphs, the atrocities and miracles. He saw the Imperium of man dying, and he saw 1,000 different humanities being born from its ashes. Not all of them would survive. Many would fall to Xenos, to chaos, to simple environmental collapse. The galaxy was cruel, and freedom did not guarantee safety. But those that did survive would do so on their own terms, not as components of his grand design, but as humans who had chosen their own path. The Emperor felt the dimensional barriers around him and knew it was time to leave this galaxy entirely. To find a place where his presence could not influence humanity's development, even unconsciously. Perhaps another empty dimension. Perhaps the void between universes. Somewhere he could simply stop. Stop leading. Stop controlling. Stop believing that his vision was the only path forward. He prepared to depart, gathering the energy needed to tear through dimensional barriers one final time. But before he left, he allowed himself one last observation: a return to the Blood Angels' strike cruiser, where Captain Raphael had declared his independence. The ship had not fallen into chaos. Instead, the Blood Angels had done something unprecedented. They had accepted the Red Thirst. Rather than fighting it, drugging it, or executing brothers who succumbed, they had integrated it into their combat doctrine. They fought with controlled fury, channeling rage into purpose rather than letting it consume them. They had stopped trying to be perfect weapons and started learning to be human warriors. And in the ship's chapel, where once they had prayed to the Emperor for salvation, they now prayed to Sanguinius. Not for divine intervention, but for the courage to honor their Gene Father's memory by becoming something more than killing machines. The Emperor watched this and felt something he had not felt since before the Horus Heresy: genuine hope for humanity's future, not because he had guided them to this point, but because they had found it themselves. He sent one final psychic message to Raphael, not a command, not even advice, but a simple statement: you do not need to be what I made you. You only need to choose what you become. Raphael gasped, recognizing the Emperor's psychic signature. But before he could respond, the presence was gone. Not withdrawn, but departed entirely, leaving the galaxy to humanity's judgment rather than his own. the Emperor tore open a dimensional rift, not to the Marvel Universe. He would not burden that reality with his presence again, but to a dimension of his own making. A pocket universe where time flowed differently, where he could observe countless realities without affecting them, a prison and sanctuary both. He stepped through, and the rift sealed behind him with finality. In the Warhammer 40,000 galaxy, the Imperium continued its collapse. Trillions would die. Entire sectors would fall. The dream of a united humanity spanning the stars was ending. But from that ending, 1,000 new beginnings emerged. Some would fail catastrophically. Others would thrive beyond anything the Imperium could have achieved. And all of them, every single one, would do so without a God Emperor dictating their fate. The master of mankind was gone. And in his absence, humanity finally had the chance to discover what it could become when it was truly free. The Emperor of mankind sat in a dimension of his own creation, surrounded by windows into infinite realities. From this vantage point, he could observe the Marvel Universe he had briefly touched, the Warhammer 40,000 galaxy he had abandoned, and countless other timelines branching from every decision made. He watched the Imperium fragment and reform into something new, chaotic, inefficient, beautiful in its diversity. He saw the Marvel Earth continue its precarious balance between freedom and order, its heroes choosing again and again to protect rather than rule. And he learned that power without wisdom was tyranny, no matter how benevolent the intent. Learned that control and protection were not synonymous. Learned that the greatest act of love was not to save someone, but to give them the tools to save themselves, and then step back. For 48,000 years, he had been the Emperor, creator, conqueror, God. He had shouldered burdens that would have crushed lesser beings, made decisions that damned billions to save trillions, and believed with absolute certainty that he alone knew what humanity needed. He had been wrong. Not about the threats, those were real. Not about humanity's potential, that was limitless. But about the method, about the fundamental assumption that survival required submission to a single will, even his own. The beings he had encountered in the Marvel Universe, strange with his disciplined uncertainty, Stark with his armored vulnerability, Xavier with his hopeful pragmatism. Folks, even Doom with his self-aware tyranny, had shown him what he had forgotten across millennia of warfare. That the goal was not to create perfect humans, but to create conditions where imperfect humans could thrive. In the Warhammer galaxy, he observed the Blood Angels discover their own path. He watched the Ultramar sector transform into a functioning federation. He witnessed Forge worlds make terrible mistakes and brilliant breakthroughs in equal measure. Some worlds fell into darkness. Others discovered light he had never imagined. And he did not interfere. This was his penance, not suffering on a golden throne, but the exquisite agony of watching humanity struggle without offering the guidance he knew could help. Of trusting that the species he had shepherded for 48,000 years could finally walk on its own, even if it stumbled. Perhaps in another 10,000 years, he would emerge from this self-imposed exile. Perhaps he would find a humanity that had surpassed his greatest achievements, or one that had finally extinguished itself. Either way, it would be their choice, their achievement or failure. And that, finally, was the greatest gift he could give them, the terrible, beautiful freedom to determine their own fate. The Emperor of mankind closed his eyes, not to sleep, for he needed no rest, but to meditate on the lesson that had taken 48,000 years to learn. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Sometimes, love means letting go. And sometimes, the guardian must save his people by leaving them unguarded, trusting that they possess the strength to save themselves. When the darkness of his self-made prison, in the silence of eternity, the Emperor finally found peace. Not in control, not in victory, but in surrender to the truth that humanity had never needed a god. They had only needed the chance to become human.